The whole defense budget of the United States is $900 billion. So that's more than $2 billion a day. There is one group which really profits from war, and that is the so-called defense industry. They call themselves defense industry. It could be the attack industry or the war industry. They like to be called the defense industry, but that's where the propaganda already starts. And that's the United States. They bombed Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Korea, Laos, Cambodia. And the list goes on and on and on. So I don't think that the United States is a good policeman.
How is your mental health studying all this stuff?
That's a good question. You have to listen to the story of what the Ukrainians say. You have to listen to the story what the Russians say. Now, the Europeans have gotten into this war in Ukraine, and they have forgotten that Russia is also a European country. And Moscow is a city in Europe, very much like Rome, Berlin, or Paris.
Who will win the global power seat? Do we see China? Do we see India?
There are not many people who dare to say this.
Who are you?
My name is Daniele Ganser. I'm a Swiss historian. I research international politics. So I look at the question, why has the United States bombed Afghanistan? What happened on 9/11? What happened in the war in Iraq? What is Russia doing in Ukraine? And why is Iran at war with Israel? So I'm looking at international politics. And I write books. And some of my books are here in German. They're also in English. That's what I do.
And why are you passionate about this topic, you personally?
I was always interested in the question, why are human beings killing each other? You know, we're now 8 billion people in 193 countries. And obviously, most people don't kill each other. Out of the 8 billion, you can say 99%, they don't kill each other. 1%, that's 80 million, they are involved in warfare, not directly on the front as a soldier, but, you know, they provide the weapons and they support the machinery. So it's only a small group which is killing each other. But I'm interested in this question. Why do we do this in the 21st century? I think it's not a good idea. We shouldn't do it anymore.
And did you got any close to an answer to why we do this?
Yeah, I think we're confused. I think we're really confused. I think people in Iran think that people in Israel are evil, and people in Israel think that people in Iran are evil. And that's a confusion. It's not true, you know. It's wonderful people in Israel and wonderful people in Iran. Or we have the problem of geostrategy. We have Americans who say, okay, we are the superpower now. So out of 193 countries, America is the superpower. They spend $900 billion on weapons, on warfare, on soldiers. So that's the biggest defense budget of the world. And they say, we want to remain number one, and we have a big defense industry. So we need wars. We need wars just to keep the machinery going. And that's another aspect. On the one hand, we're confused. We think the other one is evil. And another factor is that we have the fight between global superpowers, and we have a very strong military-industrial complex. These are basically the three reasons.
You said two are the reasons, but we can go into the third as well. But first, let's explore we are confused. So who confuses us? Is the media? Is the social media? Who confuses us?
We've been confused by the media. If you read the media in Russia, they will say that it's right to fight the war in Ukraine because Ukrainians are evil or that they are Nazis. And if you read the media in the United States or in Germany or in Ukraine, then the media say the Russians are evil and it's important to fight them. So the media are always telling the people in their country that it's correct to kill the other one. So that's a huge problem. Actually, the media should tell people on television, on the smartphone, on the laptop, They should tell people we shouldn't kill each other and let's find a solution. And, we've all made mistakes and let's get out of this mess. But that's not what they do. I study the media here in Switzerland. I'm now in Switzerland. I look at the media very carefully and basically saying, as far as Ukraine is concerned, that Russia is wrong and that Ukraine is right. And therefore, we all have to stand with Ukraine. That's the story in Switzerland. And in Germany, that's the same story. So, yes, I think the media is confusing people and forcing people to take a stand. As far as social media is concerned, you are a YouTuber. Well, you know that people who have a big YouTube channel.
You are a YouTuber as well.
I'm also a YouTuber, yes. But, that's a new level. So there's a change. There's a change with YouTube. We can, have a conversation together. We've never met before. Production costs are relatively low, which is, send a mail and then say, okay, let's talk together. And then we publish it. So now we get more perspectives. Before that was not possible. The New York Times had to call you or to call me, or the CNN had to call. That's not necessary. We can now speak ourselves. So I hope, maybe it's just a wish, but I hope that social media will help to bring in the perspectives of peace, that we shouldn't kill each other.
So you think now we're less confused than we was in the past?
No, Phidias, I hope that one day we will be less confused, because we're still very confused. Look at the Gaza war, more than 30,000 people killed. Now, the Muslim world, the Arab world, they watch the videos of the Palestinians that are being killed in the Gaza Strip. So they think Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is evil and Israel is evil. So because they watch their victims, and they have a lot of victims, many children have been killed. People in Israel, they watch the victims of the October 7, 2023 attack of Hamas on Israel. There are many dead Israelis on that day, 1,200. So what I want to explain is that also on your smartphone, on your YouTube, on your Instagram, on your TikTok, you can be trapped in a perspective. That you just see you're dead and you don't see
your own bubble.
Your own bubble. Yeah, you're trapped in your own bubble. And what I want to encourage people is to think outside, and say, okay, I'm a Jew, I'm an Israeli, and I live in Tel Aviv, and I know that my media and my YouTube channels that I like to watch always tell me it's right to bomb Gaza. Okay. But let's watch Al Jazeera for once. They say it's not a good idea to bomb Gaza because Al Jazeera is based in Qatar and they have the more or less the Muslim perspective. And you then follow some people who criticize and say we need a ceasefire now. And if we jump and listen to both sides, that can make us, less convinced that we should kill somebody. When human beings are not sure anymore, when they say, yeah, right, they have a lot of dead people too, and okay, we have a lot of dead people, and how it all started is very complicated. Then they maybe start to think and say, it's not clear. Okay, it's not clear. Let's stop it. Let's not kill anybody anymore. And that's a progress. That's a progress. The step before is when you're totally convinced that you have all the truth on your side and everybody else is wrong. And so it's right to kill them. So I think social media can help. You ask me whether I think social media has already, helped. In some ways, yes, here and there, I think it has helped. But in some other ways, it has, made people very emotional because they just watch pictures. They watch pictures, short movies of your own group. You watch your own dead and, the other group is watching pictures of their own dead. So everybody's with his smartphone and everybody's very angry and very sad.
When the war in Russia happened in Ukraine, I was shocked that we heard nothing from the Russian perspective in the West. I was really shocked. I was like, and most of the social media and all the mainstream media, they were saying the same thing. And it was at that point that I was like, oh yeah, maybe there is something more to the story. Nobody's saying the Russians' perspective here. So exactly what you're saying. But can you break us apart the other thing that you said out of the two, which is they're trying to fund the military industrial complex, the United States. And what is this and how does that work?
Yes, I said the first thing is that we're confused because everybody just has his own story. The second reason, maybe I didn't make that clear, is the military industrial complex. And the third reason is there is a fight between big powers, Russia, China, and the US. That's geostrategy. But yes, the second point, we've done media. Let's look at military industrial complex. When I was a child, maybe 10 years old, I thought that nobody wants war. I generally thought nobody wants war. I mean, if you look at the people who, their arm is gone or their eye is gone or they're dead nobody wants that, right? And I was convinced that it is like that. And then when I was 20, I started to study history at Basel University. So I got my degree in history and I also did my PhD in history here in Switzerland. And when I studied history for a long time, I realized that there is one group which really profits from war, and that is the so-called defense industry. They call themselves defense industry, but obviously if you produce a tank or if you produce an aircraft carrier or a machine gun, this can also be used as offensive weapon. So it could be the attack industry or the war industry, whatever you want to call it. They like to be called the defense industry, but that's where the propaganda already starts. It's maybe the attacking industry. They produce landmines, etc. And what they want is that landmines and machine guns and hand grenades and cruise missiles and helicopters and drones, that they are being used. That's it. They don't care who wins. So, for instance, the Afghanistan war started in 2001 after 9/11, and it stopped in 2021 after 20 years. And at the beginning, the Taliban were overthrown. And at the end, the Taliban came back to power. So you can say, that was all for nothing. But the defense industry thinks it's not for nothing. You know how many millions they made with this war? Even if the war after 20 years comes to the exactly same end. Of course, you have 200,000 people killed and many children dead and, women who've been raped and all the suffering. But the defense industry doesn't care. Now, it is very important to understand that the defense industry is very big. In the United States, they have the biggest weapons producers. So Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, these are huge companies. And the whole defense budget of the United States in this year is $900 billion. So that's more than $2 billion a day. Today, the defense budget, the money spent for military equipment and soldiers and wars was $2 billion. Today. Tomorrow, again, $2 billion. And then again, $2 billion. And that's for the United States alone. Russia has around 100 billion. And the Chinese have around 300. So it's 900 for the US, 300 for Russia, 300 for China, and 100 for Russia. But as you see, the military industrial complex, they have a big interest that people kill each other. Because if we don't kill each other anymore, they can't sell their products.
Can I stop you and ask you, do other countries buy from America or Russia or China, or they only produce weapons for themselves?
No, they export. They export a lot. Germany is buying a lot of weapons from the United States. Switzerland is also buying weapons from the United States. Saudi Arabia is buying weapons from the United States. Yes, and other countries buy weapons from Russia or from China. No, the international arms trade is very big. And it's not the case that every country just produces weapons for themselves. They also produce weapons and export them to other countries.
Okay. So a lot of countries are using of the West are using guns of United States, and United States is profiting by selling guns to other countries. And you said it's 900 billion this year, and that includes the exporting billion, and that includes the exporting to other countries as well, or is just the United States?
No, the 900 billion is just the budget of the United States. So if, for instance, Germany has a military budget of 60 billion, and if the United States sells, let's say, an aircraft to Germany, then this has to be paid with the 60 billion of the German military budget. So the 900 billion is just for US weapons produced in the United States and used by the United States Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps, plus the wars, plus the soldiers, because you have to pay the soldiers. The soldiers are like employees, they like employees of IBM or of Apple or Microsoft. They are being paid a salary every day. So that's also in the defense budget. Defense, yeah, they call it defense.
So as I understand, the budget a year, it's more than a trillion, because then they have a motivation to encourage other countries to start wars, so they gain benefit for them to buy their guns of United States and all this stuff, because it's a huge business.
It's a huge business, and I think it's normal that we all got used to living under the capitalist system. That's okay. I mean, there's a pizzeria very close by here, and the pizzaiolo, he has a restaurant, he sells his pizza. I go there with a friend and we have a nice pizza together. Of course, I don't want this restaurant to give away the pizza for free. I understand. It's a good product. I pay for it, and he has the money, and he can buy his ingredients, and he has enough money to pay for his kids who go to school and for the house. So that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm not against capitalism, but I think it's a very dysfunctional thing if we spend more than 2 billion, and a billion has 9 zeros. A million has 6 zeros, and a billion has 9 zeros. So I think it's a stupid situation. It doesn't make sense at all. If we spend more than 2 billion alone in the United States every day on the war machine. Because if you look at it in the end, you can go to Afghanistan and say, so how does the country look after 20 years of war? It's not good. It's not good. Go to Libya. Libya was bombed in 2011 by the French, by Norway, by the British, and by the Americans. And how does Libya look today? Not good. It's not good. Iraq has been very strongly destroyed. Syria has been bombed. So all these countries where you actually look, so how does it look once the military industrial complex has visited that country? It's not good. So what I'm telling you, it's the product is not a good product.
I will kind of say an against opinion just for the sake of arguing with you. I don't support this opinion. People don't kill me in the comment section. But let's say if United States was not spending that much money, and it was not the biggest power, military power in the world, maybe we're going to see more wars in the world, because the countries were not going to be afraid of United States. And this is actually something that one person in the podcast told me, that is a CIA spy, Andrew Bustamante. He said that he prefers United States to be the world power, because it's the only country that he trusts with this power, with these values. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I don't agree with Andrew. I mean, obviously we have 193 countries on the world. So the US is one, China is one, Russia is one, Cyprus is another country, Greece is a country, Turkey is a country, Israel, Egypt, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Brazil, Chile, Nicaragua, Austria, Portugal. Okay, it's a long, long, long list. Now, all these 193 countries, think of them like school children. Okay, they go to school, and then one child in this school is attacking always the other children, because the United States is not the only country who attacks other countries. I mean, the British have bombed Iraq. The British has also bombed Afghanistan. So the British they also have a very, aggressive foreign policy. The French have bombed Syria. The French have bombed Vietnam and fought against Vietnam because it was a colony. They bombed Algeria. So I'm not saying the United States is the only country, or the Russians invaded in Ukraine. So, okay, there are many countries which use violence. But if you look at the data from 1945 to today, you will see that in 1945, the United Nations were formed, and there they passed the so-called UN Charter, which is the Charter of the United Nations, which says all members of the United Nations shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force. So basically, in 45, war was made illegal. And, all the countries signed it and said, okay, after the Second World War, such a lot of chaos, such a lot of dead people, that's a good idea. Let's abolish war. So that is the Charter of the United Nations. And then I looked at what country has violated this principle most, and that's the United States. They bombed, now we remember, of course, Syria, they bombed Libya, they bombed Iraq, they bombed Afghanistan, they bombed Vietnam, they bombed Korea, they bombed Laos, they bombed Cambodia, they bombed Sudan, they bombed Nicaragua. They overthrew the government in Iran in 1953, in Guatemala in 54, in Chile in 73, and and the list goes on and on and on. So I don't think that the United States is a good policeman, because I think that was the argument of Andrew, that he said, I trust the United States because they're a good policeman. And I said, no, look at the last 70 years. This is a policeman, yes, but he has killed so many people that he should resign. He should stop doing that.
Okay, interesting. How do we stop this military industrial complex in the machine that is encouraging wars? Do you have any proposal?
Well, the first thing is, I said that we are confused on the level of the media. So on the level of the media, we should also, let people speak who say we should decrease military spending. Because on television and on YouTube and in the newspapers and on laptops, all the people that you always see, they always say, we need more. We need more money for defense spending because we're not secure. We need more weapons. We need more this and that. So every country is always saying we need to send more weapons to Taiwan. We need to send more weapons to Ukraine. So we always hear the same people. And I think a first step would be to listen to people who say, no, that's the wrong way. We cannot solve the biggest problem in the 21st century by killing each other. So let's reduce defense spending. Let's reduce it. The others can still say, no, let's increase defense spending. But I think people who say, no, let's reduce defense spending, it's too high and it's not creating any security. You see the world is not creating any security. We've been increasing defense spending year after year after year. It's not creating any security. So that's the first step. We should have other opinions in the media, maybe in social media, maybe in mainstream media, but we should hear people who say, let's reduce defense spending. I'm one of these voices, but there are many of us out there, but we usually don't get to speak on television.
Reduce it to zero?
No, everybody.
Do we need and to have military, and how much we need?
I think everybody can have, every country can have a military. I'm not against that Germany has a military, but I say the Germans should keep their military inside Germany. They should not go to Afghanistan. The German military went to Afghanistan. Why? Why did the Germans go to Afghanistan? I mean, if the Afghanistan military came to Germany, the Germans wouldn't like it. So I say, yes, Germany, you can have a military, but keep your military within your borders as a defense military. It's just there if somebody attacks. Otherwise, it's just waiting. The same for Switzerland. Switzerland has a military. Usually Switzerland does not send its military outside of the country. There's an exception. Now there are Swiss soldiers in Kosovo. Kosovo is a part of Serbia, which tries to be an independent country. And it was bombed by the United States in 1999. Okay, complicated story. But I say the Swiss military should not be there. Why? We don't want the Serb military in Switzerland. And above all, the United States military should stay in the United States. They should not be in Iraq. They have a military base in Iraq. They should not be there. They should have their troops at home. I mean, if the Iraqis had a military base in Texas, the United States would not like it. So I'm not saying we should abolish all militaries on the world forever and tomorrow. That's not possible and not a good idea. I think the best idea is every country is allowed to have a military, but this military should stay at home. Stay at home. Don't go to other countries.
Interesting. Yes, it makes a lot of sense, but there is some gray areas that we see a lot of conflicts, like, for example, Palestine and Israel, like Russia and Ukraine. And we have a similar problem in my country here, Cyprus. We have the island divided until this day. So with Turkey invaded Cyprus 1974. So so I agree with what you said, but there is also some gray areas which you don't know exactly what's the truth and what people want. Also in the I'm curious to hear your thoughts about these gray areas that we have.
These are the points. I mean, Cyprus and Turkey, that's a trouble spot. Israel, Palestine is a trouble spot. Russia and Ukraine is a trouble spot. Taiwan, US and China is a trouble spot. So we do have these trouble spots. But if you compare the trouble spot, Cyprus and Turkey, with the trouble spot, Ukraine and Russia, it's very easy to see that you would much more like to be in Cyprus than to be in Ukraine. Why? Because nobody's being shot in Cyprus. Nobody's being shot. Okay? But in Ukraine, you have a hot war with people being killed every day. Today, as we speak, people are being killed in Ukraine. Now, in every, you call it gray area, in every zone of the world that we have a conflict going on, the solution is always the same. It's always the same. First step, you have to go back in history and say, when did it start? What happened? Like if two parents, or if a couple, a man and a woman, they start quarreling and they don't get along, you have to go back and say, okay, what happened? What went wrong? And then the man will say, well, this and this and this happened. My wife is crazy. And then the wife will say, well, no, this and this and this happened. My husband is crazy. So it's usually not the same story. The wife's story and the husband's story is not the same story. So you have to listen to the story of what the Ukrainians say. You have to listen to the story what the Russians say. And it doesn't mean that one story is 100% correct and the other story is 100% lies. That's not how it is. It's like in a couple, everybody is telling something which is true, and he's not telling something which is also true, but he doesn't want to tell it because he says, no, I don't want to talk about that. It's not good, so I don't want to talk about it. So the conflict in Ukraine did not start in 2022. You know, the Ukrainians say it started in 22, and the Russians say it started in 2014. Now, as a historian, I see, okay, this side is saying that, this side is saying that. Then you have to go there and look at the data. And I can tell you, in this case, the Russians are right. The conflict started in 2014. There was a coup d'etat in Kiev, in the capital. And then there is a new government which came to power with no election. So it was a coup d'etat, military coup. And then this new government bombed part of Ukraine. So that's what we call a civil war. There's two sides of war. One is international war, Russia against Ukraine, US against Iraq. That's international war. French against Libya, two nations. If there's a war in one nation, it's called a civil war. Not because it's civilized, it's just because civilians, Ukrainians, kill each other. That's a civil war. And first, from 2014 to 2022, it was a civil war with 14,000 dead. Okay, the government in Kiev killed its own population. And then the Russians invaded and said, we want to stop the civil war. Okay, and now we have many more dead, more than 100,000. So what I want to explain is these conflicts, also Cyprus and Turkey, or Israel and Palestine, or Israel and Iran, if you look at them, they're complicated. Okay, they're really complicated. It's not so that tomorrow everybody will hug and, you know, people fall in love and no problem. But I'm always saying the Germans and the French in the First World War, they really killed each other. They really killed each other. In the Second World War, they killed each other again. Now they live peacefully, side by side. So what I want to say is, it is possible. It is possible to have peaceful coexistence. And at one point, the Russians and the Ukrainians, they will have peaceful coexistence again. There was a moment when the Ukrainian conflict could have been solved with a peace deal. And this happened in Turkey, in Istanbul, in March 22. In February 22, the Russians invaded. That was illegal. The Russians had no right to invade. Okay, but they invaded. And then the Russians and the Ukrainians met in Istanbul. I'm not sure. Do you know that story with the peace talks in Istanbul? Or should I tell you the story again?
I do know it, but I'm sure some of the people watching don't know it.
Okay. So the deal was, I mean, Putin is the president of Russia and Zelensky is the president of Ukraine. They didn't go to Istanbul, but they sent a trusted friend. Okay. So that's their trusted friends. They go there and they negotiate. Zelensky stays in Kiev. That's the capital of Ukraine. Putin stays in Moscow. That's the capital of Russia. And they sent their trusted negotiators to Istanbul, which is not the capital, but a big city in Turkey. Okay. The deal in Istanbul was, first, Crimea stays with the Russians, and the Ukrainians say that they will never join NATO. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is the biggest military alliance, and this is led by the United States. And the Russians, they don't want Ukraine to join NATO. So that was the deal. Don't join NATO and don't have any American military bases in Ukraine, because the Russians don't want American missiles on the border of Russia, you know, because Ukraine is bordering Russia. And if Ukraine comes into NATO, then the US can put military missiles on the border of Russia. So the Russians don't want that. And they say, that's a no-go. It's a red flag. And then the Ukrainians say, what do we get? And the Russians say, we withdraw our troops back into Russia. Okay? That's what you get. And that would have been a very, very good deal. It really would have been the best deal. But the British and the Americans said to Zelensky, no, don't sign this. Because they were thinking the Russians are now in a war, and the Russians are, they're a rival in the 21st century, like the Chinese. That's the big rivalry. That's geostrategy. So if we can kill Russians, and we don't even have to use American troops, we can use Ukrainians to kill Russians. That's a good idea. We want the Ukrainians to kill more Russians. So London and Washington, so the capital of the United States and the capital of Great Britain, that is US President Joe Biden, and at the time, Prime Minister Boris Johnson in Great Britain, they told Zelensky, don't sign. And that was a big mistake. That was a big mistake. Because then Zelensky suddenly said, no, we're not going to sign the peace deal. And then the war continued, and more than 100,000 people were killed. And why do I tell you the story? Because I want to remind people that it's always possible to stop the war, but the big parties really need to agree that it's important to stop it. As long as the US and Great Britain don't want to stop, the war will continue. And that's what we see in the United States. They want the war in Ukraine to continue, so it continues. And right now, I think the Russians don't want to stop it either. So we missed a very good moment there in Istanbul. That was in March 22.
How do you feel by studying all this stuff? Is it stressful? Do you become constantly angry and like you study, like you see numbers, 100,000 people are dying and all this stuff? How is your mental health studying all this stuff?
That's a good question. I mean, I am now 51 and I did my PhD when I was 29, and my PhD was already on secret warfare. So, I've done this for now more than 25 years. And what I do to keep my mental health, to keep it stable and to be joyful. I like to be on this planet. I like to have fun. I like to meet my friends. And the trick that I do is that I always remind myself, I tell myself, Daniele, it's only a small group of people that are kill each other. And that's true. As I said in the beginning, it's less than 1%. 99% don't kill each other. So that relaxes me. I say, okay, it's only a small group. And the second thing is that I say to myself, and this small group is just very confused. Very, very confused. Very confused. And so I think of all the good people that are out there, people who help other people. There are a lot of people who help other people every day. Think of a hospital. How many people, while we speak here, are working in a hospital helping somebody? Or how many people are working at a school helping somebody, or building a house for somebody, that they can live in a nice house, and putting electricity in there and putting a shower in there so they can have a nice. It's not the case that everybody's dropping bombs on houses and that everybody's killing people. No. On the global picture, it's a small group that is doing the killing. So I put it into perspective, and then that relaxes me. I say, okay, we still have this small group, and then I also go very often into nature. I walk a lot in the forest, or I swim in a lake or in a sea, and I relax myself and I see the beauty of nature, and so this keeps my mental balance.
Interesting. You mentioned the third thing is the kind of who will win the global power seat.
Yeah.
So What do you think is the future of that? Do we see China? Do we see India? Do we see this United States not being the superpower that it is now in the future?
Yeah, at one point, the United States will no longer be the superpower. At one point, that's always like that, because the British, there were once, an empire. They were running India, and they had colonies in Africa or Australia. So they were a huge empire, the British. I mean, the United States, many people have forgotten this, were a colony of the British. And then in 1776, the Americans said, the people in the United States said, we don't want to be part of the British Empire anymore. And they passed the Declaration of Independence. Independence from what? Independent from London. So, that was a split away from the British Empire. And the French, they also had an empire. They had huge parts in Africa, which were French, or the Indochine. They call it Indochine. That was basically Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. That was French. And the Dutch once ran Indonesia. So it's very normal as a historian to see that empires come and go, very much like the waves on the beach. They come and they go. That's life. No empire can stay forever. So yes, the American empire at one time will crumble and fall. I don't know when. People ask me, they say, you've studied such a lot about the American empire. I've actually written a book. Oops. It's this book.
You can find people the link in the description.
Yeah. Here I write about the American empire. And I also say right now the US is still the empire, but at one point it will fall. And then people ask, well, will China be the new empire? Or will Russia be the new empire? Or what will happen? And frankly speaking, we don't know. What we now say, or what many observers say, is that we live in a multipolar world. And what we mean with polar is there are many centers of power. Washington is one center of power, a very big center of power. The White House is in Washington. And in the White House, you have the US president. And now on November 5, there's election year in 2024. Who will be the new president, et cetera, et cetera. But Beijing, the capital of China, is also a center of power. It's smaller than Washington, but it is a center of power. And Moscow is also a center of power. And Delhi, the capital of India, is also a center of power. And then we see that these other centers are there, and that's what we call a multipolar world. Before, we had the so-called Cold War. That was two powers, Soviet Union against United States. In the Cold War, the Chinese were not very important because they were weak. They were not industrialized in a way that they were a big economy. So nobody was talking about China. It was basically Russia, Soviet Union against the US. And then the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And then from 1991 until the Russian invasion in Ukraine, till 2022, we had the so-called unipolar world. And the unipolar world was 30 years. We can basically say 1990 to 2020. And in these 30 years, the Americans were the only empire. They could do what they want. They bombed here, they bombed there. Nobody could do anything. They tortured people in Abu Ghraib or in Guantanamo. Nobody could do anything. And now there's a new situation. It's the rise of the countries that came together in the so-called BRICS. B stands for Brazil, R for Russia, I for India, C for China, and S for South Africa. And these 5 countries together, they challenge the NATO countries. So NATO countries are led by the United States, and the BRICS countries are led by China. And that's the multipolar world that we're in right now.
Interesting. Can you explain a bit, because you are from Europe, I am from Europe, what's the role of Europe in these things? Or just a puppet?
If you take this, yeah, no, this is very important. The role of Europe has led to the structure of the world as it is today, because Europe from the year 1500 till today, so from 1500 to 2000, 500 years, Europe has expanded and conquered the world. So if you look at South America and you ask yourself, what languages do we speak in South America? It is Portuguese in Brazil and Spanish in Chile and in Bolivia and in Ecuador and in Venezuela. So these are European languages. And that means Europeans have gone south across the Atlantic and conquered South America. The British have then conquered North America. What languages do we speak in North America? English. Now, English is a European language. We don't speak anymore the languages of the Apache, the Sioux, the Cheyenne. So the Native Americans have all been killed, or the indigenous people in Latin America, they've all been killed. And that means the role of Europe was one of conquest and one of expansion. And it was not only North America and South America, it was also Australia. What language do we speak in Australia? Well, we speak English. What language do we speak in New Zealand? English. And people don't think about it. People think, well, you know, probably the Aborigines spoke English and that's why we speak. No. The Aborigines didn't speak English. So these cultures were decimated and killed and eradicated by the Europeans, who then actually conquered most of the globe. But the Europeans had problems conquering Japan. So what language do we speak in Japan? Japanese. Still. Not English, not French, not German. So the Japanese were not conquered. What language do we speak in China? It's Chinese. Okay, so China was not conquered. Hong Kong and other, places were colonized for some time, but it was not possible to conquer these lands. In India, we had a colonial period when India was run by the British, but India still has so many different cultures, so many different traditions, that it is not been dominated by Europe. So that is the history. The history is that it was Europe which conquered the world. It was not Australia which conquered the world, and it was not China which conquered the world. In fact, I looked at Chinese history. The Chinese, they were able to sail to Africa at, about the same time that the Europeans sailed to Africa. And then the Chinese had a big ship and they put, lions and other animals on that ship and brought them to the emperor in China. And then the emperor in China said, I don't need that. Burn the ships, destroy the ships. We don't need to go to Africa. We don't need to go to Europe. We are China. We don't need anything else. So that was a completely different mindset. The Chinese were not an expansionist power. Europe was. Now, I guess your question, what is the role of Europe, is not about the last 500 years. It is about now and tomorrow, I guess.
But your answer was But your answer was very educational. I was not appreciating what the role of Europe in the global world was.
It's important to, people think the last 500 years have, been many countries expanding. No, it was the European countries expanding.
And it's not that I'm proud of something. And it's not that I'm proud of something, but I forgot that Europe played such a big role in the whole world. So continue saying
the dominant role.
What's the role now of Europe?
And now the role of Europe, I hope, is actually to understand that we cannot solve all problems with military means, that we should not kill each other all the time, because it's not only that Europeans have conquered the world, we've also had the Second World War in Europe, where we killed each other, and the First World War. So it's a moment where we come to the conclusion, we've done it all. We've really done it all. We've done all sorts of killings and burnings and devastation and destruction. Of course, we can do it again. It's like, we're good at it. But we've also realized maybe it doesn't make sense to just continue that road anymore. And so I think Europe is now in a situation where many Europeans actually would prefer peace to war very strongly. They say, no, let's have peace. Let's not kill each other. But Europe has a problem. Most countries in Europe are part of NATO: France, Germany, Great Britain, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey. Most countries, Italy, Spain, they are part of NATO. And NATO is run by the United States. Okay? And when the United States says, now we attack Afghanistan, then not only US soldiers go to Afghanistan, but, the Polish, the Spanish, the French, everybody goes. So it's like Europeans have become, the auxiliary troops of the United States. The Americans say, we go there, and then all the Europeans run. And that is a very stupid situation. Because the Americans have said, and now we fight a war against the Russians. And we arm Ukrainians. And so the Germans took Ukrainian soldiers into Germany and trained them and gave them tanks, the Leopard tank, for instance, and trained them in Germany on US military bases. There are many military bases of the United States in Germany. So now the Europeans have gotten into this war in Ukraine, and they have forgotten that Russia is also a European country. They've completely forgotten it. They think Russia is not in Africa, not in America. Well, where is it? Oh, it's in Asia. No. Russia is a European country until the Ural. The Ural is a rather high mountain range there. And the other part of Russia is in Asia. So Russia is a country which is in two continents. And Moscow is a city in Europe, very much like Rome, Berlin, or Paris. So, by following the American orders, it's really the American commando says, we do this, we do that. The Europeans have gotten themselves in a very dangerous position in Ukraine because they're killing each other. The Russians are killing Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are killing Russians. They're both Christians. Okay, they're both Christians. They're both Europeans. And the Germans are supporting the Ukrainians, and the French and the British are also supporting the Ukrainians. And you ask me, what is the idea for Europe? I think we need to stop that war in Ukraine, and we need to tell the United States to stay at home. Okay? The Americans have done many bad things, but also many good things. But we don't need them to create chaos in Europe. We don't need that. Because afterwards, we will have the chaos in Europe. We will have the chaos. There's 6,000 kilometers of Atlantic Ocean for the Americans, But when Ukraine burns, the Americans can go home. Poles cannot go home. They're neighbors. Romanians cannot go home. They're neighbors. Russians cannot go home. They're neighbors. It's going to burn all over. So if you ask me about the future of Europe...
Do you think we have the power to say to the United States, go home as Europe?
Not yet. Not yet. Many people don't even dare to say it. I say it, I say, Americans, please go home. It's enough. Go home. Mind your own business. You have a lot of problems in the United States. Why don't you solve them? Take your soldiers. There are more than 35,000 US soldiers in Germany. They should all go home. All go home back to the United States. There are not many people who dare to say this. Not many people. Not one single party in Germany says, American soldiers, go home. Don't create such a chaos in Europe. And in Italy and in Cyprus and in Turkey, not many people, there are American military bases in Turkey, in Incirlik. The Turks, they don't say Americans go home. They don't say it. The Italians, there are American military bases in Italy. The Italians don't say Americans go home. So we're not ready yet. But if you ask me for a vision, the best vision that I have is that Europe understands that we've done enough killing, that Europe understands that the Americans are creating a lot of chaos in Europe, that they should go home. And then as Europeans, we stop attacking other countries. We just stop. We've done it. Enough. It's enough. Obviously, the other possible scenario is that we just continue and, fight a big war with Russia, because Russia is a nuclear power. Germany has a lot of military power. The French have nuclear weapons. The British have nuclear weapons. We can, have a big destruction all over Europe. But I think it's a stupid idea.
Who do you think is powerful in 2024? Is it billionaires? Is it politicians? Is it people behind the scenes that we don't know? Who rules the world, basically?
Obviously, all 8 billion people rule the world. 8 billion people. Like, it's very important to make a distinction between spheres of influence. Like, your decision tomorrow, what you will eat, is your decision alone. US President Biden cannot, make you eat what you eat tomorrow. Russian President Vladimir Putin cannot decide what you or I will eat tomorrow. So we have a lot of influence. That's very important. We tell each other we have no influence. Okay, when you go to bed tonight, you decide. It's you who decides. And whether you will stay online for 2 hours or 10 hours tomorrow, you decide. You decide. It's not President Zelensky who decides. Zelensky has no influence on your online time. The decision with whom you're going to make the next interview, that's your decision. So I'm one of these persons who says we have a lot of influence over what we eat, when we go to bed, whom we meet, and what we watch. Whom we follow on the internet, and whether we do a comment, or when we do a comment on your YouTube channel or on my YouTube channel, how will we write? Will we write with respect, or will we write full of anger? Who decides? Not the American president, not the German chancellor. That's myself. I decide when I write, how I write. Okay, so that's my first statement. We have a lot of power. The second statement is, yes, of course, billionaires like Elon Musk, they have a lot of power too. Obviously, Elon Musk has more power than you or I. I mean, that's obvious. He's running Tesla, he's running SpaceX, and he's now just flown to China to talk to the Chinese. It was very interesting to see that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken flew to the United States, so, a politician, and he talked to the Chinese government, and, they couldn't talk very well because U.S. government is telling the Chinese, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and we're not happy with you here. The Chinese don't like that. They don't like to be lectured. And then Elon Musk, shortly afterwards, lands with his jet. He's a billionaire, okay? He can take his jet wherever he wants to go. And then he talks to the Chinese and he says, I have this Tesla, it's an electric car. I'd like to sell it in China. How can we find deals? And so, yes, the politicians are very powerful because they have what we call the monopoly to kill. Okay? US President Biden and Russian President Putin, they are the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So, or Zelensky. They can send a tank who destroys a house or a village. They can send a missile. That's the politicians. So the politicians are very, very powerful. The businessmen are also powerful, but they don't have the license to kill. They cannot kill. We've given that to the politicians for whatever reason, but we did that. And the billionaires, they can buy politicians, obviously. And you also mentioned, just by passing, whether there are groups behind the curtain that we don't even see. Yes, there are groups behind the curtain that we don't even see. But the problem is, for me as a historian, I cannot even talk about these groups because I don't know the names. I don't know what they do. Why? Because they're behind the curtain. They exist. There are groups that are not in the media that have influence, but it's just speculation. Some people say they're extremely powerful. Some people say they don't exist. It's in between. They exist, but they're not. Nobody runs the entire world. Nobody.
It's interesting. Me thinking, I never thought that. I thought that, people have so much power over us and all this stuff. But like when you put things into perspective, no, I can do. I'm free to do a lot of stuff in the day. So that power is also limited on what power they have over me. They have some kind of power, but limited. So we the people kind of have the power in the way that you describe.
Yeah, we the people. And that is such an important point. Because if you think somebody could tell you tomorrow how many online hours you can have. Somebody comes and says, I'm, the president of whatever. You only have 1 hour in front of your laptop and that's it for the next 5 years. That would be a lot of power, but they don't have that power. You can have 15 hours in front of your laptop if you want. You can have 2 hours. Who decides? You decide. Or somebody comes and says, I'm the president of Russia and I decide what you will eat for the next 30 days. That will be, that would be a lot of power, right? But they don't have that power. We decide what we eat. The third thing is somebody comes and says, I decide when you go to bed. I always want you to be in your bed at 10 o'clock. Nobody has that power. The Swiss government cannot tell me when I go to bed. And the next level is, I decide as president of France, I'm Emmanuel Macron, I will decide who your friends are. No, you don't. I decide who my friends are. I decide the people I like, people that I want to meet, people I want to eat dinner with. We decide when we have dinner. We decide where we meet. And you know what? We decide what we talk about. So actually, in the end, human beings have a lot of power. We have a lot of power. We can also say, I don't want to listen to television anymore. And we take the television and we put it on the street and write for free, take it. I don't want it anymore. We can do it. We can do that if we want. If we don't want to do that, we can buy 5 television. Put one in the living room, put one in the bedroom, put one in the kitchen and one in the bathroom. Who decides? We decide.
It's time for me to ask you the question that I ask every guest. I give you $1 trillion. And the goal of that $1 trillion is to have maximum positive impact in the world. How do you spend it?
I would spend it on a media revolution. Because the media is a very powerful tool. The media actually makes people think in this way or in that way. And then I would spend it on YouTubers for peace. And I would find YouTubers in every country. And I would obviously look that I find YouTubers who have a lot of influence with a lot of followers. And I would tell them, okay, how much money do you need for a year or two to make peace one of the topics? It doesn't have to be the only topic. You can still have fun and you do this, or you do car races, or you meet lions, or you jump from a bridge. Have all the action stuff. Have the interesting stuff. I know, and there you're obviously a professional. It is a gift to entertain people and to get their attention. That is a gift, and you have that. Now, but I would tell YouTubers also to dedicate some of their time to promoting peace. And, that they would promote the story of let's not kill each other. Let's have respect for The fact that there are different stories in the war in Ukraine. The Russian story is partly right. The Ukrainian story is partly right. It's not one story which is wrong and the other one is right. It's not like that. And with Hamas and Israel also, Israeli story is partly right. The Hamas story is let's see both sides and let's not have this killing anymore. I think with the money that you suggested, it's quite a big figure. I could run the program for 10 years in many countries, and then that would have a net impact. Yeah. I'm a guy who really I believe in communication. Communication is key in every relationship. With your friends, communication is key. You ask them, how are you? How's your life? What's going on? And it doesn't really matter whether life is very good or very bad. The important thing is that you listen to them. You listen to them. That's communication. If it's very bad, you listen to them. It helps. So communication is key. And also in a company, people need to communicate, or at school or in a relationship, people need to communicate. And I've always been fascinated with communication. So I would take all the money into communication, but not with established journalists, I will really put it to YouTubers and tell them, now you guys, I give you money if you sign this paper that you will promote peace.
It's interesting that you mentioned this. I'm so surprised. I ask this question all the guests, and that's a very interesting answer. But I'm curious to hear, how do you use your YouTuber power in a way for Germany, to do the right thing for Germany?
Well, my YouTube channel has around 300,000 subscribers, so it's not very big compared to like big YouTube channels. It's okay. It's not very small, but it's not very big. It's somewhere in the middle.
But for politics and the stuff that you talk, it's quite big. It's easier to be an entertainment YouTuber and to get millions of subscribers.
Yeah, for politics, that's true. It's a big channel. I do most of my interviews in German. And I try to tell people in Germany that first of all, they must not blindly trust the media, okay? Which in Germany is ARD, ZDF, Spiegel, Süddeutsche Zeitung, Neue Zürcher Zeitung, the established media brands in Austria and Switzerland. So the German-speaking world is 80 million in Germany, 10 million in Switzerland, 10 million in Austria. So altogether, that's 100 million people. And that's the focus where I work. I give public talks, I had a talk here in Basel in Switzerland. There were 1,000 people coming, and I give my analysis, and then I put the pictures on my YouTube or my Facebook or my Instagram or my TikTok or my Telegram. And I tell people, don't blindly trust the media story. Because the media story in Germany is, we need to send more weapons to Ukraine. We need to send more weapons to Ukraine. The Russians are evil. The Russians are evil. The war started in 2022. The war started in 2000. And then I say, wait. The war started in 2014. And wait, we shouldn't send any weapons to Ukraine because that could lead to war all over Europe. We should have peace talks. So, I usually give my perspective on international history, and I tell people, don't just trust me, okay? Think for yourself. Listen to this guy, to that guy, and make up your own mind. That's what I do on my YouTube channel.
Okay, so you're trying to give the other opinion that the media is not giving. This is kind of how you're using your influence power in Germany.
Yeah, that's correct. For instance, when I talk about the terrorist attacks of September 11, I tell them it's not only 2 towers which collapsed, it's 3 towers. There was a 3rd tower which collapsed. It was not hit by a plane, and then I put it into my book. And people don't even know. They don't know. And then they hear about it, and they think, okay, 3 towers? I've only seen 2 on television. And, then they start thinking.
And I have another 2 questions. The second to last question is, did you wanted to talk about anything else in this podcast that we didn't touch on?
No, I'm happy. I think your questions were very good. Thank you very much. It was good to have this conversation between Switzerland and Cyprus. That was very good.
Yes. And the other question that I always ask the guests is the last question, which is, you are going to die after this podcast. In 40 seconds, you will die. So what's your last words to this world? Maybe to your wife, I don't know, you have a wife, to your children, to the people watching you, like what you want the last words to be for you?
Yeah, I have 2 children and I have a wife. And I would, if I have 40 seconds left, I would call them and tell them that I love them, that I think life is a wonderful thing. And that I think when you die, it's not all over. It's just the body who dies, the soul lives on. So I see you in heaven. That's what I say. I think, don't worry, I'll see you later in heaven. Do your life and don't be afraid. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you guys for listening until the end. We love you.
Thank you, Phidias, for having me. It was a pleasure and an honor, and have a good time.